I see that this issue, as we've discussed just a bit, has even kind of has sort of divided the right in terms of the Stone sentencing and also the situation with Andy McCabe. And I'm glad that we have our guest for today is Andy McCarthy, who everyone knows. Andrew McCarthy, a U.S. attorney. He was, I mean, you see him on Fox. He's a contributing editor at National Review, best-selling author, and he was the former chief assistant U.S. attorney. He joins us now, and he's been following this and writing some very good pieces on this. Andy, as always, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Dana.
So, and I've seen that this is even, I want to touch on the Stone thing first, because the sentencing, you've written a really good piece that we actually cited yesterday on this. I know that this issue, it seemingly has kind of divided the right a little bit, where you have some individuals who say, well, he messed up. He's guilty of procedural charges. This was, he shouldn't have done this. He deserves it. He deserves at least to be sentenced. And then you have other individuals who say, well, isn't this entirely predicated upon an investigation that was known to be based on fraudulent means? And it was publicly even known at the time the investigation was going out. So if we're discussing really the integrity of the law, wouldn't that have been compromised from the very beginning, and not just when Stone chose to not go along with that? Can you even reconcile those two positions, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you can't reasonably have a functioning justice system if you allow people the license to lie to investigators or mislead an investigation on the off chance that, eventually you'll be able to show that what was being investigated was bogus. In order to have a functioning criminal justice system, especially when you're in a country, and a lot of countries aren't this way, when you're in a country where you have the great privilege of being able to tell law enforcement to go pound sand, that you don't want to talk to them, then if you make the decision to speak and to participate in the proceedings, then you have to do it honestly. Otherwise, you should just say, I'm taking the fifth and leave me alone. So I don't have a problem with the idea both that the investigation was on a bogus premise, and that you don't get to mislead the investigation, because if a real injustice is done, at the end of the day, you're supposed to have prosecutors who have discretion not to go forward with the case. And if it turns out the prosecutors are the problem because the whole thing has been politicized, then the president can pardon the guy. So there are a lot of mechanisms in the system, so that when it's a human system, you can't weed out injustice, because we just can't. But there's a lot of fail-safes in the system so that if injustice occurs, you can address it.
Which is really ultimately what William Barr did when he when he learned what the sentence recommendation was, 7 to 9 years, and he countered that. And I agreed with you because I always assumed that was within his power to do so. He wasn't, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, he wasn't trying to intervene and somehow undo the conviction. He was just simply suggesting that perhaps maybe the sentence recommendation was a little harsh. He's allowed to do that.
He sure is. And let me just give you a sense of how silly this whole thing is. Neither the sentencing guidelines nor anything that the Justice Department says about the sentencing guidelines are binding on the sentencing judge. There's nothing that Bill Barr or the Justice Department, or for that matter, the 4 lawyers who, did their Sally Yates star turn and handed in their resignations, right? There's nothing any of them can do to control how the sentence comes out. It's completely up to the judge, and she doesn't even have to follow the sentencing guidelines. She can follow the statutes. He was convicted of 7 counts. If you add up the statutes, it's I think the total exposure is 0 to 50 years. So she doesn't have to give him 90 to 108 months, which is one interpretation of the sentencing guidelines. She doesn't have to give him 37 to 46 months, which I think is Barr's more reasonable interpretation of the guidelines as applied to this case. She could give him nothing. She can give him 50 years, or she can give him anything in between. And there's not a thing the Justice Department can do about it. So they've manufactured this whole controversy over a non-binding recommendation made to a judge who gets input on sentencing not only from the Justice Department, but from the defense lawyer and the U.S. Probation Department. So she already knows. There's nothing the Justice Department is telling her about the case, which she sat in on the trial of, or the sentencing guidelines. She knows more about it than they do. So this whole idea that he's like somehow controlling the sentence is just absurd to anyone who actually is familiar with how the system works.
Yeah. One of the discussions that I've seen sort of on social media, and I kind of wonder this myself, but not being a lawyer, I mean, clearly, let me know the lay of the land here. Knowing that there were so many questions of legitimacy as to the investigation just in total as it relates to Stone, and I want to get into the latest with McCabe here too. Is it even possible for him to request a new trial? I mean, could this be declared a mistrial and then all of this has to start over again? How would that even proceed? Does that work?
Well, yes, he can move for a new trial on the grounds that his constitutional right to a fair jury was violated. And the issues, there'd be a number of issues that would go into that, like how much of this information was available to the defense lawyers. Did the juror lie or mislead people about what her biases were?
Yes.
Is that something that should have been known at the time? And the other thing, Dana, I think that would probably factor in here is that the evidence in the trial against Stone is overwhelming because this guy not only obstructed the proceeding, he decided he's one of these rocket scientists who decides to do it in text messages. So, it was all there for the jury to read, including the threats to the witness, which is why it took about, 15 seconds to convict him at the end of the case. So one of the hurdles he'll have to get over, if it turns out to be relevant, like, did it really make a difference to the outcome of the case that this juror was biased? That's something he'll probably have to address. But look, in this country, we're entitled to a fair jury, and if they can show he didn't get a fair jury, he should get a new trial. I don't know how much it'll help him to get a new trial. I don't know how financially ruined he's been by this whole escapade, and it looks to me like he'd get convicted in the end, but I think he's certainly entitled to move for a new trial.
And you make me think of something, one more thing on this as well, related to this, because this juror who was, the foreman, which is amazing to me because I don't even know how she made it on there. She was very, very vocal on social media, and people have, obviously, they have their First Amendment rights, and we don't believe that anyone is without political opinion or bias. But is that something that you think is going to come into play at some point? Where is the line on being able to obviously express your First Amendment right and have political opinions, and then having that also be considered by attorneys when they're going through the jury selection process and whether or not someone is disqualified from being on the jury or not? How is that? Do you anticipate that's something that's going to have to be handled at some point?
Yes, in this case it will, because we now have a juror who may have misled. I don't want to cast aspersions at the juror because I don't know if that's what happened. But understanding that we don't know all the facts, if it turns out that somebody misleads you about what her biases are, the fact that she has biases and maybe is a person who should have been disqualified from serving on this jury would not be a violation of her First Amendment rights. We're all allowed to have political opinions.
Right.
But, there's obviously a certain kind of juror who shouldn't be a juror in this case. That doesn't make the juror a bad person. But, like, for example, if you're a Democratic activist who is like every hate Trump rally that comes along, and you're like out there with your signs that say, impeach Trump, I hate Trump, Trump is awful, and then it turns out that you get called for jury duty on a case where it involves a friend of Trump who was associated with the campaign that you were, vehemently against, you're not a juror who ought to sit on that case. And that doesn't mean we're condemning you or telling you that, you're a bad person. I'm if I got called to jury duty in connection with a case that involves something that I was passionately interested in, and that if I was being honest, I couldn't say I could be completely objective about, or if it was like a member of my family that was under investigation. The fact that I have First Amendment rights doesn't mean I'm a suitable juror for that trial.
Right. Yeah, that's a
and
good.
Look, we got lots of trials. If you want to be a juror, we can find one for you.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd
be easy to get one. As it relates to the jury for Andrew McCabe, how did he get? Was it just because the case against him was weak? Is this why there's no charges against him with this case, or was it that he maybe somehow skated because of his service with FBI? Tell me about this.
I think that we're going to find out that there's more going on here than what we see. I've been going through the Inspector General's report on McCabe for the last couple of hours because I want to write about this. I don't think the case against McCabe was weak at all. I think it was quite strong that he had made false statements. And I accept the fact that, he lost his job, he was fired, he's going to lose at least part of his pension. And so it's not like nothing happened to him here. Right. He did obviously, I think he landed on his feet just fine, but he clearly, yeah, right. So, but I still think, if you look at how General Flynn was treated, or you look at how Papadopoulos was treated, or these other people who, they scorched the earth to try to nail and ended up, pleading them to false statements counts. And then you see this guy dance away without anything, then you have to ask yourself, do we have two tiers of justice here where the connected people get away with murder or at least false statements, and everybody else has a different quality of justice? If that's all that's going on here, and McCabe is going to walk away and that's the end of it, I think we got a big problem. I just saw a report, however, that says that Attorney General Barr, this has obviously been done under the radar screen, has investigations ongoing into the decision to charge some of these other people, like General Flynn in this case, and whether those charges should have been brought. So if this is somehow at the end of the rainbow, what we get to here is this is Barr's way of saying the era of politicized law enforcement needs to be over on both sides, and we're just going to, we're going to lay down our weapons here, and everybody's going to walk away, and we're not going to use the criminal justice system anymore against our political enemies. That would be, I suppose, that would be a good development. It wouldn't take away what has already happened to these people. I mean, Flynn lost his house. A lot of these people have
his
been
whole
ruined
livelihood.
by these investigations. And I also don't think that I agree with Barr that the criminal justice system shouldn't be used as a weapon, but I have no confidence that the next time the Democrats get in, it won't be.
I know.
So we'll just have to see what they do with everyone. That's
the big question there. Andy McCarthy, we so appreciate your expert perspective on all of this, because there's so many of these stories and these situations here with regards to DOJ and FBI flying around. Yeah, it's really hurting people's belief and faith in these institutions, unfortunately. Andy McCarthy, you can find him at andycmccarthy.com, editor at National Review, and go get one of his books. Andy, always a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.